So I'll be doing debates and stuff. It's funny that you mentioned poly people. I've only had an interaction with poly people because Prime, you hosted her one day. Or you hosted someone who hosted someone who hosted poly. And I like look on my stream at the tab that I had open of your channel, and that it was now this person. And so I'm like talking, and I engaged a little bit, and they're just like, oh, we end up getting into a debate. And that debate went so south so quickly because they're so psycho. And so I have those videos. I'm probably link it here. If you look on my channel, I think it's like Fanatic Debates Unhinged Trans Person, because that's what I called her, an unhinged trans person, because she's absolutely psycho. And yeah, I think there's some people that you just really can't interact with because they're not really worthy of debate. They're not sane people, and she's one of them. But yeah, either way, I'm excited for these conversations. I don't think these topics are things that are like really up my alley. So I'm going to try my best to be engaged, but I might not, bring typical Fanatic smoke. But who knows? It's always there.
I've never heard this poly person. I don't know who this person is, but
she's an
ANCOM. Don't waste your time.
She's an ANCOM. It's the same. It's the Demon Mama, poly people, Pinto. All of those kind of like anarcho. Communists kind of have their own little space of Twitch ball.
Yeah, but I feel like the ideology doesn't matter because she's fucking crazy.
Yep. So. You can't interact with them. It doesn't. Like, they're never going to win anybody over. It's just a waste of energy and time. They don't exist. They're not people.
Okay.
Fuck you. I'm going to do it for the content anyways. It's going to be hilarious.
Well, I respect it. Yeah, you should. I can't wait
she's
to watch
constantly
the video
coming at me for like being an ANCAP and shit, and then now she was like, "You're a fucking transphobe." I'm like, I'm gonna fuck you up.
Let's move forward for the introductions. But thanks so much. Next we have Corey Campbell, one of the nicest people here, which is why I don't know why he interacts with us.
Don't slander me like that, Prime.
Thanks for being here, friend.
Yeah, always a privilege to be here. Again, I try to never take it for granted. I'm always grateful for an invitation. I'm Corey Campbell, PhD candidate in biochemistry. You can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv, Corey Campbell84, on Twitter, Instagram. Literally, it's Corey Campbell. I'm especially grateful to be here with my fellow Canadian lactoid. Always a pleasure, just like last week, with his urine-soaked flag. I now know why it's soaked with that substance as a Canadian. So I'm glad we're multiplying. And welcome, lactoid.
So okay, I'm gonna skip the lactoid just for that. So I've been binge watching. I usually don't binge shows, but I actually been binge watching The Americans, which I had never actually seen, but wanted to see that. Right, it's a show about Russian spies living in America, and it's like, oh, this is practically a documentary for lactoid. Lactoid, okay? All right, like look, and that's exactly what a spy would do, right? Like have a flag waving behind him. So lactoid, you've been found out, but we love you any which way. We won't turn you over to the authorities. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Buddy. So we're here to talk today about my dear comrade's daughter being killed, which is unfortunate, but I'm looking forward to that discussion. How do I sound, guys? I just got a brand new mic.
Oh, do you have a wrapper in your hand?
Are you crinkling a candy wrapper?
Oh, that mic is very audible.
Hey, you might want to put a filter if you're able to. I think it's picking up a lot.
You might want to stop hurting our ears, please.
Okay. Is it okay now?
You're fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Are you still wrinkling?
No.
Well, you gotta test it out.
Still.
I'm just kidding. Move on.
I don't know what the fuck's going on. So, yeah, Lactoid. You can find me on Anti-Communism United, Discord and Twitch. I'm upgrading my gear, so there's going to be some, maybe some irregularities, but hey, just bear with it, and it'll be good in the end. Thank you, Prime, for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking to all of you wonderful people.
So, you were telling me that you're going to get a new camera. I'm not sure how the new camera is going to help when, like, it takes, like, it shows this much of your face, okay? All right? So, I don't know.
That's the only thing people want to see.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. Next, our friend Tiberius D is with us. Thanks for being here. Ty, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for letting me crash the panel on short notice. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, hey, there's a Russian assassination topic, and we're talking about the French, and I wasn't invited. What the hell, Prime? So I appreciate letting me drop in last minute. This one should be fun, even though I have absolutely done no preparation. But we'll see how much I know my shit in the act.
The best, the best Twitch debates happen with no preparation. Let's go to our friend Doobie, our Dark Lord and Savior. Back with us as always. Thanks for being here, Doobie.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Okay, let's jump in. Okay, topic 1. Climate activists in France have filled golf course holes with cement as a form of protest. While much of France is under severe water restrictions due to a historic drought, golf courses have a legal exemption. This allows them to water their extensive fields while others can't even wash their cars. Do you think that destruction of private property is warranted for these types of protests? If the activists somehow manage to permanently shut down these businesses through sabotage, would they be better than a common criminal? Or does bringing attention to the existential crisis of global warming override such concerns? So yeah, it's just as it sounds. I think these activists did to 2 golf courses in France, and they they filled like the holes themselves with like cement. They got like video of them doing that. And obviously, the course is unusable until they manage to fix that, which I don't imagine is extremely difficult. But you are destroying private property, and there's a thing that's come up again and again. It's come up in like BLM. Is this worth it? Does it change just because it's in the context of a protest? Yeah, that's what I'm really interested in exploring. Let's start with our man Wick.
Yeah, so when it comes to these kind of protests, and we see them all the time, not just with golf courses in France, but the people who are super gluing their hands to art and things like that, the people who are disrupting traffic and literally blocking traffic and things like that. I think there's a level where protests do have to at some level be disruptive. Like there is value in that. There's value in getting into attention, but you have to balance that alongside of the real risk you have of turning people against you when you just fuck shit up, right? When you destroy private property and things like that. And it's a balancing act, right? You gotta look into it. Like filling up golf course holes, it doesn't get my gander up, right? But when you talk about like this scene where we saw recently, where a bunch of people blocked from Extinction Rebellion, I believe was a group that blocked these lanes of traffic, and a man who was on probation who couldn't get to his job, and if he didn't get to his job, would go to jail, was seen like arguing and wrestling with these people, saying, "Please, just let me through. Just one lane of traffic, please, love of God." Like that optically does not work. It just does not get people to your side. So when you want to be effective, when you want protests to be effective, you have to balance optics into it. You just have to. And things like blocking traffic and things like that can have deleterious effects to what you want to do. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, so in terms of like, a scale of protests, like what's bad and what's not bad, obviously as someone that believes in natural law philosophy, that the destruction of private property is always morally wrong. You can't justify it. You logically can't justify it, because to do so, you would have to call yourself an animal and you would be incapable of making any logical statements at all. That being said, like there are certain things you like really focus on to like stop. And then there are certain things that like, I have bigger fish to fry, because it's kind of fucking hilarious. Right. And I won't lie, like it does in my heart make me giggle a little bit when the government is restricting water, but not for, their fancy fucking golf courses. And they attack those golf courses. There's a certain bit of me where it's like, okay, the state is privileging this one business over everyone else in their own authoritarian structures. Like it's difficult for me to be like, have a big outcry here. But it is wrong. There's no doubt about that, destruction of private property is not right. And you're not actually attacking the right people. You're not going after the politicians. You're not protesting in a way to actually change things. You're you're doing the same shit Extinction Rebellion always does, which is bullshit anti-capitalist fucking Malthusian screaming and freaking out. Yeah, so I mean, like I would say that it is wrong. There are a lot worse things to be wrong about, and the real issue here is not the impending climate doom that we hear about every 10 fucking years that never comes to fruition. The real issue here is that the state during a drought is restricting people's water, and punishing and being tyrannical against its citizens, and then picking winners and losers, such as the rich people, so that they can have their pretty golf courses while fucking over other people instead of privatizing the water like they should.
Thank you. Hey, Chow.
Yeah, so I think this is vandalism just at its core, but for the sake of protest, I think this is a pretty brilliant approach. If we were to go down the criteria of what Wick was talking about, is it like complete destruction that is really going to turn people off? No, you're putting cement in holes. There's nothing burning.
You sound a little low to me.
graffiti.
Am I the only one?
No,
Yeah, you sound a little low.
I hear a crinkling, I think.
Ah, okay.
That's
Yeah,
you,
that's so
Lactoid.
funny, Lactoid. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I should be sounding fine. It's fine on my end.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe bring your mic a little bit closer.
I was like, yeah, I was like, can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
I think vandalism is vandalism, and but for the sake of protest here, I think this makes sense, because if we were to go down the criteria list of what Wick just talked about, it's not like this. Nothing's burning, nothing's being graffitied or anything. It's cement in golf holes. And is it bringing attention to the issue? Absolutely. I would not have known that France. I didn't even think France, it was possible for them to be in a drought. I would not have known personally that France was in a drought if it weren't for this event, and we wouldn't be talking about it here. So I think it is doing a lot to bring the issue to people's attention. And I think a lot of people in France, because of this, are going to be like, yo, what is actually going up with these golf courses? Getting these legal exemptions from this law, from this tyrannical government, going back to what Fabian was talking about. Now, is it like effective enough to bring down this business? No, absolutely not, because what golf courses could do is make new holes. I saw this video on r/oddly satisfying. Yeah, they fill up the hole and then they dig up a new one. And so then what the activists are going to have to go back and put cement back in. Yeah, probably if they want to keep on going, but I think they've already accomplished the goal, which is, well, getting the issue out to the public.
Sounded so much sexier when he got closer to the mic. I'm just gonna put that out there. All right, let's go to Fanatic.
I think activism is brilliant. I think it does a really good job of like bringing awareness, and that's the goal. I think in this case, what they did is they brought awareness. I didn't understand that. I didn't know. I had no idea that France was going through a drought. And I guess it really just matters most that you do attach it towards something, like to where it's like some sort of political cause, so that you have something to do with your activism. So it's not just doing things for the sake of doing things, but doing some things with the value of like indicating, hey, something needs to change, and you need to be aware of this. I think all of it makes sense. This is something that's like very minor, like putting this whole, like I'm doing this thing. If they're successful enough to be able to lobby different people to be able to say, hey, we should be able to continue to get water and whatnot for our golf courses, they definitely have the money to withstand somebody just inconveniencing them by putting a hole, right? By putting cement in their holes. Furthermore, I don't think that optics are such a problem when it comes to the stopping traffic thing. I think it makes all the sense in the world that just when you have a person that's like, yo, I'm on probation, and if you guys don't let me through, then like I can go back to jail. I think that just indicates how absolutely ridiculous parole and probation are. Like the fact that there's like so little wiggle room and things like that. I don't think that optically hurts your cause. I also think that you could decide to make an exception for that one individual. But I think it also really, really highlights the reason why people stop traffic in the first place, which is to indicate you're going on with your life while this problem is severe and needs your attention, and you're just willing to chase the bag and ignore all of this. I'm stopping the traffic, so now the problem is confronting you as well. So as much as you want to say, oh, it's not my problem, I don't need to march, I don't need to do anything to be there, now the problem is actually your problem too, because it's impeding on whatever it is you want to do. And I think all of those things are really, really great in helping people to make sure they get the attention. Now, some people are going to be sour and say, I don't care about this. But guess what? You're now aware of the issue. And I think that if you have a moral compass, eventually you can say, while I wasn't originally moved by this, let me figure out what the hell they're even angry at. And now that I know what they're angry at, some people who have consciousness are going to say, hey, I actually care about this issue. And I think that's what activism does. So it's a great job. Big ups to them. I'm not even sure that global warming is real. I've never done a lot of research into it. I'm probably going to assume it's real just, for the sake of whatever. I hope that people aren't just doing some crazy, gross conspiracy to like make everybody whatever the freak. So I'm going to say that it's probably real. I haven't done my own personal research, but if it's real, how else do you get people's attention? They did their job, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay, all right. I was unexpected ending to that, but okay, let's go to Matt Corey.
Yeah, I pretty much echo virtually all of the same sentiments that came before, like Fnatic, Jay Chow, Scott.
That global warming might not be real.
No, Scott and Jay Chow. Well, maybe Scott a little bit elements of maybe not as big of a deal as the crazy media is making it out to be. But yeah, totally, global warming, climate change is a thing. But in terms of particularly what Wick alluded to, in terms of I sort of see protests to some extent like a PR campaign of like a large part of the intention is to sway public opinion, and there's clearly a tipping point when it comes to protest tactics that your tactics can work against you, and public opinion will start going against you. And I think if you protest intelligently, you will get your point across and you will get public support. And I think based off of this tactic here, at least based off of the article, like it seems like they really went about it in a pretty intelligent way. Of like, sure, technically this is destruction of private property, which is totally the most immoral thing in the world, according to some people. But despite this destruction of private property, overall it's pretty innocuous when it comes to the actual larger issue of climate change and all the implications as a result of climate change, and how like as alluded to by Scott, the government is sort of picking winners and losers. To maybe use a more Canadian example, I'm a filthy Canadian like Lactoid. I'm in Quebec. This is pretty much like hockey central. And like if we were in the middle of a drought here in my province, and like we were like using water to like fill up hockey rinks or like to maintain our hockey stadiums, like I would be pretty enraged and I'd be pretty motivated to hopefully protest in an intelligent way. And so I think pretty much it seems like we're all on the same page, at least so far. That's it for now.
Thank you so much. Next, Tiberius D.
Sorry, I had to mute there for a second. First, I'd like to start off by saying that this is a perfect time to build even more golf courses. I think we need more. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. We'll use all the fucking water. We'll give none to the people. Of course, I'm aiming here. I think most people know me pretty well by now. Property damage isn't cool. All right, like I've been on here when the churches got burned. I was here when the houses got burned. I condemned it then. I condemned it now. The other side of that conversation, though, that you guys bring up is the activism point, because while I'm not much of an activist in like, oh, hey, we got to get people's attention by fucking up something horrible, is that on the other side is that this is something that happened in France and we're talking about it here in the States. Clearly, it's gotten attention and it's done what it was supposed to do. I'm not equipped to deal with the meta ethics of that, but there's just a level of me that does not like that. I would very much like our wonderful people to get together with their representatives and to be like, yo, what the fuck? Why are we doing this? Why do we allow this kind of thing? Change the laws. But that's the reformist in me. Finally, actually, if it does seem like I'm not really too concerned about golf courses, I am incredibly biased against golf courses. They're actually one of the most hideous, disgusting things humanity has put on this fucking planet. And when I see it, I'm not gonna cry a river. I don't care how much money has been spent on it. I'm just not too sad about this one. Anyway, that's all I got for now.
Thank you, Lactoid.
All right, well, just go ahead and stop me if for some reason the mic doesn't sound correct. But as a true American, not Canadian, as a true American, this is vandalism. And while I understand it might not be as bad as other forms of vandalism, I almost feel as though it's being treated flippantly. I think this suffers from the same problem that I think some people before brought up, like the BLM protests and the blocking of roads. And I think this suffers from the same issue of the innocent party problem, which is, we can construct a hypothetical that would seem very unfair to everybody in this room. Okay, so I have one neighbor on one side, and then I have one neighbor on the other side. My neighbor on my right side shoots my dog. Okay, and then I get angry, and because I'm angry, I burn down my neighbor's house on the left. All right, even though the left neighbor had nothing to do with it, didn't hurt me, didn't go after my dog, is going to walk out and say, "Hey, what the hell? You burned my house down." And then my response is, "Well, he shot my dog." If my house just got burned down, my response is going to be, "Well, then why the fuck did you take it out on me? Why are you coming after me? I'm an innocent person." The United States prohibits punishing innocent people. It's against the Geneva Convention to punish innocent people under groups. I assert that when people do these kind of protests where they're hurting innocent people, I think that they are violating the spirit of the Geneva Convention. They are engaging in group punishment. These golf courses already have had to make concessions. They've had to cut their water to a third, less than a third of what it currently is, and they're only allowed to water during specified periods of night. Their justification is that unless they can use this, just like everybody has to cut back, they also have to cut back. But if they're forced to cut back completely, that's over 15,000 high-paying jobs done for, right? These are economic. These are places of economic growth. These are also people's personal property, right? So there's an economic element. There's an element of this is somebody's shit who is innocent. And also, France is one of the most responsible countries in the world when it comes to energy use. They're mostly nuclear power. So they're like 78% nuclear power. They're 19.3% renewable. Their coal consumption is negligible. The idea that we're going to start like raising awareness in France that there's an issue. France isn't the issue. France doesn't need to change. It's other countries that need to change, like Australia, China, Russia, and to some extent the U.S.
Thank you so much. Doobie, please.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just echo what Lactoid said. I feel like we are treating this kind of flippantly. And so yeah, we can say, hey, it's just concrete. They can replace the holes, etc. But I think allowing for this kind of behavior encourages further behavior down the road. So I hope these people are found and prosecuted severely. And I think that the fact is these golf courses have already made a deal with the government. I think like in 2019, they're only using 30% of the water they normally would. So they're doing what they can to keep their golf courses from falling apart and turning into wastelands, while helping out with this problem of climate change, right? In the best way they can, because they've got a drought going on. And the reality is that if they don't water their fucking grass, it's going to die. And if it dies, it'll cost them millions of dollars to replace it. Right. So, they have that reality to contend with. They made a deal with the government. They went through the proper authorities and the proper processes that we'd expect them to. If you don't like that, go to your fucking government. It just seems childish.
Open to the panel.
Yeah. This has been brought up. Like, why are we treating this so flippantly? Why are we being so kind of cavalier about these things? And while we can acknowledge that property damage and things is on some level bad, right? Like it makes sense to me that we would treat someone burning down a church much differently than putting cement in the holes in a golf course. Like the level of harm here that is being dealt, the ease with which it's fixed, these aren't comparable, right? They're not comparable. And so to act as if we should take as much umbrage at the golf course holes to someone burning down a church is weird to me. It's a little wild to me that we would treat.
What about throwing rocks through the windows of the church?
This is probably a bad thing to do. I'd condemn that, but I would condemn that less than burning down the church.
Sure, but I mean, it's still a bad thing that people shouldn't do, and if they do it, they should be prosecuted.
Yeah,
right?
but what you talked about earlier in your statement, right? That prosecuted severely, right? I would severely prosecute someone who threw a rock through a window, right? I just wouldn't do that.
And well, yeah, it's sort of Wick's point of like, to some extent, like, sure, maybe in an ideal world, and also I'm not against perhaps like prosecuting these individuals if in fact like they're found and caught and whatever, we have evidence that they did it, whatever, and they go through the proper processes to recoup whatever damages that they can. But also at the same time, sure, you can say in an ideal world they should be prosecuted, but like already in the system it's built in like just some like petty crime, like whatever, go to your local police station, say that your wallet got stolen. They're not gonna like just some crime they overlook because this is not worth it to put in, the human power to track it down.
This
maybe-
okay, but this
I
is
think
the
it's
issue.
kind of
This
important.
isn't petty
I think
crime.
it's kind of right. That's kind of what I was going to say, is that like it is important to recognize that, like, at least from my perspective, right? You are a criminal if you vandalize someone's private property. The only way that you can make yourself not a criminal is to give some form of restitution. Now, under, our current liberal democracies that often avoid, there's a criminal legal code of, paying fines to the government, and, and then there's civil court cases, et cetera, et cetera. But in order to not be a criminal anymore, you have to pay restitution. Now, for some of this form of vandalism, it's as simple as digging a post hole, right? And replacing the hole, putting some grass in. It's a very cheap replacement in terms of labor and everything. It's a couple $100 to get it all fixed. The problem is that when you already have some of these greens that are already stretched for water, cement can poison the grass, and then you have to replace the entire like burn or an entire section. And golf courses to reconstruct, they can cost like $7-10 a square foot. And so if you have to replace, let's say, a couple 100 square foot because you poison it and it like fucked up all the grass and it has to be replaced, restitution now isn't, $100 or $200 a damage. It's actually extremely expensive in terms of property damage. It could even get close to, let's say, the burning down of that church. And so, like, I do think it's important to recognize that, what is morally right and what is morally wrong is,
but
in
that's
terms of,
reductive.
did you damage the property?
But that's really
and how do you
reductive.
pay restitution?
No one was talking about the
damages
specific
and the price.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, I
yeah,
was
they
gonna
don't
say
care because
that's
they're criminals.
no one is
No,
making
they don't
like
care
the,
because
the,
they think about something else more of a priority, which is bringing attention to this issue because it's related
Right,
to
the
climate
ends
right,
change.
and
justify
I
the
don't
means.
think
I can
I think
commit
it's really
crime
reductive to like
against
try
other
to
people.
reduce the conversation down to like the total cost of whatever the thing that someone is.
How is that
doing.
reductive? Can you explain?
It's well, sure, because obviously when we're talking about the gravity and the impact of these things, like and what someone's goals are and what the aim is, like trying to say, well, yeah, but just this one costs about the same cost as it costs to replace the church. It's like, I think these are wildly different, right? Because one, obviously, the church is going to probably serve as some sort of core function of that society as far as
They're
like
both
housing
holy
people,
sites.
so on and so forth. One's going to what's it called, like. One of these things is like literally has been like a hallmark of the society and been instrumental in helping people's lives. The other one is just a simple thing of entertainment that like a few people probably enjoy. These are wildly different. Number one.
Well,
Number
I
two,
would say-
I
I
would
would say
also
that
say,
that's
and
reductive.
Doobie, okay, sure. I don't think you know what the word reductive means. Doobie, the
No, I
question
know
I
exactly.
had a
You're
question. I'm sure you do.
oversimplifying- you're
So Doobie,
oversimplifying.
okay, but you were literally just
Very
reducing it to
reductive.
the actual cost of cash. Okay, but I'm being reductive. Doobie, you earlier made the statement that like these people are criminals and you kind of don't like it, so on and so forth. So then my question became, do you ever believe in any kind of civil disobedience? Do you think that there's ever a point where someone should be doing something that is illegal in order to push some sort of political aim?
So
As a
I'm
la-
gonna
as
answer-
a, oh god.
I was asking
Yeah,
Doobie.
yeah.
I was asking Doobie. Fabian, no, ask
Like you
Doobie.
attack my position and then
and you'll get a chance.
follow up with
You'll get a
second
chance.
question.
You'll
Like,
get a chance.
No, I'll
Just-
keep it short. I'll keep it short. So as a last resort, right? What would be my answer? Right. So if you've tried the other methods and that isn't working, I think there might be a justified like use of force at the end of that. However, it doesn't seem, given what Lacto laid out earlier, this country is very, very like pro climate change legislation. They're doing way more than the surrounding countries to deal with this issue. So it doesn't seem like people are just ignoring this fucking problem, right? It seems like these courses carved out a deal with the government. They're holding to the deal, and they don't like the deal that these people legally carved out. Just really quickly, and I think that my issue is with this, the way this kind of being framed by a lot of people here, is that like what we're actually talking about is intentional destruction of private property in to further like a political message, right? And the issue is that you guys just happen to agree with the political message, right? If these guys were doing this in favor of like Nazism or some shit, I'm sure you'd be like you'd be one of these people tracked down and charged.
Of course.
Right? So yeah, so like it just seems like we shouldn't dismiss this kind of stuff or minimize how terrible it is because we agree with the message.
Well, no, but that's literally baked into it, right? It's like simply like, for example, like obviously there's some sort of civil disobedience, like such as like registering to vote when you knew that it was illegal, right? When I mean, like when they were discriminating, right? Or Rosa Parks refusing to get to the back, sit at the back of the bus. I mean, to sit at the back of the bus, right? Like those kinds of things. Like you can say, like, hey, this is absolutely activism. This is actually criminal, right? Because it was illegal to do this. But then there comes a point where you can start saying there is a moral impetus to do something in order to force people to respond in certain ways. And that's what civil disobedience has always done. Even protests, where it's like, hey, we're trying to set a curfew to stop you from protesting, where people make the decision like, no, we're going to keep this protest going because it's a righteous cause. And if we don't, then that means that we may never actually get accomplished what we're trying to do, right? So then there's plenty of times, and obviously baked into all of those things, it's going to be the idea that the only thing that will justify you doing this, like breaking this civility, right, is going to be like if you have a righteous cause in order to do so. You're doing so with an aim and a purpose, and so anybody who believes in that aim or that purpose is going to go ahead and is going to get behind you. So it's not that we're just happening to
So even if
agree
they're
with this and therefore it's
we
right.
got
That's
the
literally
whole list. We got a whole list.
that's literally baked into the idea of protest.
Doopy, you can
Yeah, but
respond. Hold on one second. Doopy, you can respond. Then we're going to Scott, Corey, Jay Chow, Lactoid, Tiberius, and Wick. Okay. All right. So
okay. So I mostly agree with you. I think the core disagreement that I have is I'd put a dividing line between private property and public property and government property. Submitting those illegal requests to the government or registrations to the government versus breaking somebody's window or setting someone's car on fire because you disagree with a political action that's happening or a law that's in place. I'd stick a dividing line there, right? So
okay.
I think that's our core disagreement.
Scott, your turn.
Okay.
Wait, we don't have a quarter. I agree with you. I think burning the
again,
business is worse.
So again, you said that I'm being reductive in the way that I define restitution, right? Like, I don't want to make this a diatribe on explaining restitution, but the fact of the matter is that if you burn down a church, right, you cannot give perfect restitution because you cannot give back that exact church in that exact condition. You either have to rebuild a church or you have to come up with some sum of money that represents the value of the church. And you can't ever actually know the value of anything because value is held subjectively by the individual. And so, it's, whoever the primary property owner is, et cetera, et cetera. You do the best that you can until the situation is alleviated in some form of compromise of restitution. Now, in terms of this idea of civil disobedience, civil disobedience is almost always passive resistance, right? I think what you're doing is you're attaching the ability to break laws that are brought by a government and then saying that it's okay to break laws by the government for moral reasons, which I do agree with. And then you're tying that to something that is a property damage or a tax against other people as a justification because the issue is somehow bigger on a macro level or some consequentialist analysis of like how the ends justify the means. It's okay to hurt some people that stand in your way if the end result is better for everybody in some regard. And I would say that no, that's not what's okay. It is okay for Rosa Parks to refuse to sit at the back of the bus because the law itself is a form of aggression against her that specifically targets her based off of her race by the state and forces her to be segregated in some form. That is not the same thing as actively going out and damaging other people's property in active resistance to harm other people and their property as a means of getting an environmentalist message out. Like, these are very clearly different things.
Yeah, it's crazy because Fabian just didn't listen to the exchange that Doobie and I had where we already covered that. And again, he was still being reductive. So we're just going to move past that. Next person can go.
I just have a clarifying question or two for Doobie.
Oh, fuck, man.
Where you alluded to when it comes to civil disobedience, like you
What
are
a
okay
fucking
with it
pivot.
As a last resort. Is that correct? As in, like, as a last resort, you are okay with some sort of
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to know, at what point do you know that you have, like, basically what's like your checklist of like, okay, now it's like the
That's
last
gonna
resort.
like, okay, so like this is gonna depend like very much so on the reason we're being disobedient, the if people were being harmed as a result of some policy in place. It's like it would depend like on a lot of shit, right? But for me, I think that if you've petitioned the government right? And the thing that you're petitioning them to change is doing like a harm to people, right? Whether that's like, hey, where you don't have access to like voting rights, or you're being targeted by the police or whatever the fuck it is, and you have evidence of this, then yeah, I can imagine, like, if nothing else is working, then staying out past the curfew, protesting in front of the police station, even setting the fucking police station on fire if there's nobody in it. I can imagine all those things being reasonable at some point. And I think any reasonable person would say that, hey, at some point, if something terrible is happening to you as a result of government policy, and nothing you're doing is getting that government policy to change, but you need it to fucking change because harm is being done to you or to your family, to your community, etc. Like, yeah, at some point, you're gonna cross the line, right, into violence. Right? I would just avoid violence against people if at all possible.
Sure, and I think I tend to agree with you. I would just say, I think a lot of protests or protests like this, where I would say, in the grand scheme of things, fairly innocuous. It's like to hopefully with the goal in mind to prevent to getting to that point, as in, all of the negative consequences aren't piling up, and then now it's the last resort. We can maybe be more violent or
Right.
more aggressive, where it's like, I think it's fair to say, at least, younger generations, they're pretty vocal, at least based off of the polling data that I've seen, of like, climate change is a problem. Like, when you start doing something, and I'm assuming that holds true in the younger generations in France, of like, they want action to be done, and it doesn't seem like action is being done. And so maybe these types of, I would say, innocuous protests is like an attempt to like get attention and not have to resort to sort of those drastic measures.
Yeah, I feel like I need to point out the consequences of what I just said, right? Because I think this kind of goes both ways. So if I were like a neo-Nazi, if I were a person in a neo-Nazi group, right, and everything we're doing to keep the black and brown people out of my country is not fucking working, the government isn't working, everybody's fucking NPC, nobody's listening. I'm trying to vote to change these policies. It's not fucking working. At some point, I might think, hey, fuck it, I'm gonna go shoot something up, right? And I think it's obviously like extremely like dangerous line of thinking. But I think it's just like a reality of
Doobie, it's worse. What he basically said is that it's like white supremacists attacking and vandalizing Mexican restaurants or Jamaican restaurants, and then him saying, well, that's okay because like action's not being done to get rid of black people in their neighborhood.
Doobie,
but it's not really
I
like
can
that
engage
big a
with
deal.
that, but
Wait,
I mean, that's
but please don't. Please don't, Corey, because remember, we already embedded the idea that in order for these things to be justified, we already have this moral impetus to make sure that that there's a righteous cause that they're fighting for. So immediately trying to create some
But it's righteous off of your opinion.
Obviously, it's going to be subjectively righteous, right? Because unless you believe in moral objectivity, right? So then obviously,
yes, I do believe in moral objectivity.
I'm not talking to you. I'm not talking to you because you're an idiot. I'm talking to Doobie because he actually has a working brain. I'm not addressing this towards you. So anyway, Doobie,
that's what you always say when you.
I know, I got it. I'm trying to actively avoid it. Don't talk to me, Doobie. So otherwise, so the point that I'm making is that, like, obviously, yes, you can easily create a parallel where you find some cause that obviously everyone disagrees with, and then say, well, yeah, see, look, these people could do the same thing that you're doing, and they would be doing it for their cause, right? But I think then that, like, obviously is. I'm not saying that you're trying to be bad faith, but it kind of sullies the conversation because now.
Wait, hold on. I wanted to finish the sentence, right? Because I wanted to acknowledge that, hey, yeah, it is going to be subjective, right? But that's okay. I'm not a person that's afraid of imposing my subjective beliefs on people. So Same. If I subjectively believe, like, hey, you don't get to fucking keep all the black and brown people out or attack the gays in the streets, and hey, that's just what it's going to be because there's more of me than you. Hey, fuck it.
Sure, but I'm saying, but it's not a fair parallel, obviously, to introduce that into this conversation where we all obviously feel that like Nazism is going to be terrible, and so then it's like you're creating a thing. Well, what happens when bad actors? Because like you can use that argument to literally dissuade from anything. For example, you can say, I believe that we should have like an elected body and so on and so forth, and that they should do whatever, right? And it's like, okay, well, but what happens when the person that's elected is evil? So then therefore we should like undo that system. It's like, no, obviously not. Like the system still functions. We just got to make sure that like hopefully the people are doing right by it, right? And you could say the same thing for police officers, right? Well, we should never have police, because if police is corrupt and they have like undue power, then they can like do some really, really heinous things, right? And it's like, well, no, we probably wouldn't just make the argument then that we should get rid of police altogether. The argument just becomes that, yes, people with power have a greater responsibility. You could use that for anything. What happens with parents? Parents shouldn't be watching their kids, because if a parent has a bad intention with the kid, then they have even unfettered access to abuse, right? No, obviously there's going to be a moral belief that like the people that have the power, the people that are using whatever tools, that those people have a moral thing that we all agree with.
Yeah, so just to like agree with you.
It's real simple.
So
let Doobie respond. Shut up.
And then I got to move on afterwards. We got a whole line.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to agree with you again, like, yeah, I think any reasonable person would say that at some point violence is necessary, right? If there's some harm being done that they subjectively believe is harm, right? And to be clear, it might even be worth crossing the line into destroying private property or attacking just individuals directly. Right. So if I were in a place where all the water is controlled by this one company and people are fucking dying of like dehydration or whatever outside the fucking walls, and they're not giving us fucking water. Yeah. Fuck that private company. We're going to attack it and take it. Right. Like at some point, you're going to get there. I think the core disagreement is just going to be as to whether or not this is worth it. Right. In this particular instance.
Sure.
Yeah. So
private
let's go.
Property,
yeah, and I don't even know if global warming is real. So you're right.
Private property damage against a non-aggressor is objectively wrong.
Great.
Period.
Corey,
It's objectively
did you finish your point? And then we got to go to Jay Chow.
I did. I would
Chow.
gladly cede my time.
Okay, so in this conversation, I think three things have to be separated. The legality and the morality of things is pretty obvious. Yeah, vandalism is illegal, and I don't think anyone on this panel would be like, yes, vandalism, let's go. But for this conversation, it's a bit more nuanced into the morality area because, well, it's for a specific cause. And so then, as what Fanatic was saying before, yes, us believing that whatever that was being done, the holes being filled up with cement is good, is because, well, because there is a goal in mind and a message in mind, and it's worked. And when it comes to the actual consequences, well, they're very minimal in my opinion. And so we have to like make that separation there. And then there's another thing: policy versus activism. Yeah, sure. France. I'm very unaware of France's targets when it comes to its climate change policies and whatnot. But right now they're in a drought, and so then they put forth a policy. But this policy is really, I would say, like kind of ineffective when you're still allowing golf courses to use up so much water. Yes, maybe they cut it by half or a third. Maybe they had to bargain in order to get the government to agree. But the activists, they don't care about that, whether or not it's being met in the middle. They just want it all out because they kind of see it as a whole. Golf courses need to go. And another thing, if we're going to be talking about then the policy of a country, and everybody's saying France is so much better than other countries around the world, no country in this world is on track to being compatible with the Paris Climate Accords. And so then I think everybody still needs to do a good job. And even if France is like, 95% there, well, they got to get to that 5%. And if the activists are kind of being like, yo, let's get up to that 100%, then maybe this is a reason why they are doing this in the first place. And then the last separation I want to mention is the short-term consequences versus the long-term consequences. And I think on the discussion of restitution for the damages, is a short-term consequence. We know what are its immediate effects and the monetary cost of it as well. But then when it comes to the long-term consequences of, say, like climate change, it becomes a little bit murky, because especially when an action on one side of the planet can influence a reaction on the other side of the planet, we can't calculate that. But what we do know is that if climate change were to occur, as what the scientists are saying, if we're not compatible with the Paris Climate Accords, it could be disastrous. Some might say that this could be near like extinction levels. I'm no like scientist myself, so I can't say whether or not personally this is true or not, but it seems like it's really dire. And sure, maybe golf courses are like maybe millions or billions dollar industry, but then if that is the trade-off to the life of the planet and the human species, I'll gladly take that trade-off.
Okay, let's
Especially
go.
it's fucking golf courses. Like, come on. Fucking golf. Who likes
Trump
golf?
plays golf. Just keep that in mind.
Trump plays golf? Good.
Lactoid. Lactoid, Ty, then Wick.
Yeah, I just don't see how these golf courses are. It's not like they're not even doing what the government wants them to do, right? They are abiding with what like the incredibly pro climate change recognition and addressing government in France wants them to do.
They're not
right?
compatible with Paris.
And what happens
It's
if
not
people
good
feel like
enough.
because like look, we using that argument, we could say things like corporations right now in the country, they're doing what the government requires of them. When you find out companies like Amazon and Walmart are paying literally $0 in taxes because of nonsensical loopholes, then it feels like, yo, look, just saying, well, the government, it's what the government said, then I can see where people can start feeling like yes, you've gotten the government in your pocket, so you're able to get away with nonsense that's still harming us. And if they feel that way, I could totally understand why those people would say that's not enough. That clearly just the government allowed it is not a good barometer, right? Because the government was literally enforcing some of the civil rights stuff that was like literally harming Black people, right? The people had to decide, hey, I know that the government told you that this is okay. We're saying it's not okay, and we're willing to fight it, right?
Right.
Like,
No. I get that. Right. I guess more along the lines of what I'm doing is it's not like there's like this, I guess this perception that they're in like the government is in their pocket. They had to cut their water down to 30% of what it is, right? This is like the bare minimum they can do unless like they lose everything. And if they lose everything, that's millions of dollars and 15,000 people out of work. Now that's important for like the long-term like economic success of a lot of specific areas. But also, again, I think it suffers from like the innocent party problem. If during the Civil Rights Act, instead, protesting and stuff, instead of the Montgomery bus boycott, right, where people very rightfully said, we're going to enact our right to choose and not engage in a particular service, which forced the bus to change because, that was a major part of their ridership. If instead of doing that, they just found some random white guy and like beat him up, or they found some like random white store and trashed it and destroyed it, or some house owned by like a white family, like, you guys voted for, the racist party. We're going to like torch your fence now. Like, I think at some point, is nobody here concerned about innocent people getting hurt? And it seemed like, and it seemed like between Doobie and you Fanatic, there was some agreement here of like kind of the public-private distinction, because yes, the government is the one that's actually conducting these actions. But the private organizations here are they are innocent to some extent, right? And so I don't know, like with blocking the cars. I guess my question for you Fanatic would be like, do you still hold the position that like that's okay? Like the position that you had when you came in here, or are you now like kind of reevaluating that?
Well, I've always, I still feel like blocking the cars would be okay. But I think again, the thing that Doobie and I were, the agreement was, it was more so he was talking about like persons, like personal things, right? Not like something a lot more, defensible, like a business, right? Because I don't believe that corporations are people, and I don't think I would ever compare like some damage towards a corporation to like actual like personal damage on a citizen. I think those things are wildly different. Number one, and then number two, it's crazy that you say like yes, like they should have just done what they were doing as far as civil disobedience, because when you start talking about the civil rights movement, I don't know if you're particularly familiar with this, but if we want to start talking about the long hot summer of 1967, which largely drove God knows how much of that civil rights thing, there were violent protests all around the country, and it's impossible to detach that violence from the actual civil rights legislation that we're talking about, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1968, and so on and so forth, right? Like, so it seems like for Black folks, the violence is pretty much the only way that we've ever been able to achieve the type of success that we're talking about when it comes to political aim.
All right, I just fundamentally, I guess I'm not.
I'm sorry. Wait, let me before you say you disagree. I want you to understand something. I didn't voice to you my opinion. I didn't give you my opinion that's whatever. What I'm stating to you is the fact that you cannot tie any civil rights progress for Black people in this country, you cannot point to any of that where we can't find an attachment of violence. So what I'm saying is that it seems like that's the only effective way.
Can I ask you a question?
I was just
This
okay.
is just wrong. It's factually wrong.
So
Sure, name it then.
Sure. This disentangle.
Sorry.
Right?
I'd like to
Name
make sure
it.
I want to get that last point out, and then Wick, go ahead. Sure. After that,
Sure.
And then Doobie and Scott. Okay.
So
Okay.
while it is factually correct to say that there were
No. I said no. Lactoid. Get the last, and
yeah,
you gotta say.
just because I was going to say. So when I'm saying I disagree, I guess I'm more specifically talking about if there were certain events in the civil rights movement that they were targeting innocent white people or innocent Black people or innocent people of any race, which I think we saw a lot in the LA riots. To me, the hypothetical would be like my right-hand neighbor does something, so I hurt my left-hand neighbor for it. They're innocent people, and there's something particularly distasteful about attacking innocent people that I think maybe to Doobie's credit, like I can't even think of scenarios in which it would be justified, because it seems like in every scenario in which it would be justified, you could just simply take out that aggression on the government instead, like the actual entity which is harming you, as opposed to innocent people. And blocking roadways, I think there people discount a lot of the harm. It's tremendously risky. You're raising the risks of accidents, fatal accidents dramatically. Ambulances can't get to where they have to go. And then, of course, obviously, the massive inconvenience. I think Wick brought up one example, or somebody brought up one example. I'm sorry, of somebody who potentially had their freedom at risk because of. Sure, you can say it's like a bad system, but these people are instigating a kind of weakness of that system, and that these innocent people are going to be the ones that suffer for it. I think that's just unfair.
Let's go to Wick. We'll go to Wick, Doobie, Scott, and Jay Chow. Okay. Oh, and Ty.
Okay, so to back up a little bit and address you directly, Fanatic. So when we talk about the civil rights movement in the 1960s and things like that, you're right that there was violence associated with that movement, but I think you're exactly wrong when you say that helped the movement, or it was, if anything, helped progress towards the movement. If anything, it stymied it. It made it last longer. It drew it out longer and we can point to this by looking at the 1964 Act, how that passed before the violence occurred in the long hot summer of 1967, right? Like the long hot summer of 1967 obviously didn't have anything to do with the 1964 bill passing or not. It was.
Do you think that there was no violence before the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed?
So
then what are you talking about?
So what I'm talking about is you saying the violence was there, so that's what led to us getting it passed. Is just
sure. Yes. Okay. So here, let me get. So again, I'm asking you for a specific piece of legislation that you can point to of civil rights progress for Black people that you can't associate with any previous violence. And if you're talking about the 1964 civil rights, that was my claim. My claim, as I stated it very clearly, was that you cannot point to a single piece of legislation that exists or any sort of civil rights progress for African Americans in this country that you cannot detach the violence from it. That's what I said. And unless you have an example of that, it sounded like you were going to be pointing. It sounded like you were going to be pointing towards the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and again, we had violence for that as well. So again, do you have any?
So what you said, and I want to be clear, and the one thing I am pushing back against is you said, to paraphrase you, that it seems like that violence is the only effective solution for Black people.
That's not what I said, and I just restated it again. So I'm just going to disagree with you. I'm disagreeing with you. And you're just now you're missing. Okay, good. Then get the quote, because I just said what I stated, and I said it as clearly as I stated the first time, and now you're going to go and try to go to some erroneous paraphrase instead of actually dealing with what I said. I resaid what I said. What I said, and now you're just misquoting me and not actually arguing what I said. So yeah, we're not even having. You're not actually engaging in good faith.
Okay,
you're a liar.
Okay, all right.
It's a liar.
So again, look at the vid. I want you to clip my words right now. Look at the vid. Go back.
I said what I said, and I know what I said, and you're a liar.
Exactly. Go and see it and judge between me and Fanatic here, and I'll expect that apology right after you go and look this up afterwards. Okay. So this goes to the larger point though. When it comes to these things about, obviously, no matter how righteous you think your cause is, there have to be limits on what you were allowed to do.
So you're not going to name any piece of legislation? You can't? You're not going to?
Again.
Because that was a challenge that I put out there.
You said no. The challenge that you put out there, right? The things
Wick,
that I'm pushing
Wick,
back
the
that you've
answer
got
is
claiming
Title
you didn't
IX.
have said, right? That you claimed that you didn't say, but you obviously did. Was that
So you're not
it
going to
seems
name
to
a
me
piece
that
of
the only
legislation. Okay, I
effective
got it.
means
As
of
long as everybody on
protest
my
is
side
violence.
sees that I asked
Okay,
for a piece of
you're just
legislation
fucking
that wasn't
wrong,
tied to
dude.
violence, and he
You're
hasn't
just
been able to name
wrong.
one. He
You're just
said when I
wrong,
made the
and you're
statement, I
you're
made the
wrong, and
statement
you're being
specifically
stupid
that you
about it.
cannot name
You're
a
not a
single piece
stupid
of
man fanatic.
legislation
I don't know
that
why
that
you're being
existed
stupid
for,
right
and
now.
he's not
I
naming
don't know.
a
I don't know
single
why
one.
you're being
So
stupid
again, the
about this right
challenge
now.
is not just to him;
This
it's to
this
anybody
is
else that
such
did
a
what I said.
cryptic fucking
Literally any
plea,
person name
dude.
a single piece of
Because
legislation that is
obviously,
not
wait,
tied to it.
Okay.
You
Okay.
can't
what
name one, and I was
legislation can you
correct.
say
Okay. All
that
right.
wasn't
Title
tied?
IX.
Wait,
Okay.
fanatic.
Title IX.
Fanatic.
Title
Marxist
IX wasn't
Title IX.
Title IX wasn't for black people. I said specifically when it came to
Okay.
black people in this country.
Fanatic. Wick is
Yeah,
not.
I said that
Wick's-
originally. I'm not moving the goalpost. I said that originally. I said
Okay.
specifically when it comes to black people in this country, you cannot name a single pet piece of progressive legislation that we can't
So you're-
attach to violence.
Okay,
Name it.
Fanatic.
Okay, so I was right.
real
Thank
quick.
you.
Wait. So this is
No, real quick. What you're
wait.
saying-
Stop.
What you're saying is that
I
black
said what I
people
said.
require
If you can't
violence?
name it, I
Jesus
don't need to
Christ.
engage.
Fanatic.
You don't
what-
even remember
Hey,
what you
Lactate,
said.
you go. I'm talking.
motherfucker.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Lactate. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Yeah. So
You're
I
saying-
told.
you're
I
saying
just
black
wait.
people
Well, Lactate's talking. Lactate is talking.
Okay.
Fanatic,
okay.
you said that.
Lactate is talking. Lactate, make your point.
Lactoid said.
Thank you.
Why are black people
Fanatic.
inherently violent
Lactate.
and others aren't? I don't understand.
Lactate, you finish, please. Thank you.
Lactoid,
Oh my
please.
God. So what I think Wick is trying
So
to get
racist,
out
bro.
before getting interrupted constantly is that the point here is, maybe you can't point to any like civil rights legislation for black people that isn't tied to violence, but there's a question as to, did this violence actually help the situation, or was it successful despite this violence? Doobie has been in the chat, and there's evidence to suggest this, that violence in civil rights movements tends to actually have the opposite effect. There is a blowback. And people don't like to see this, and so it creates a political opposition to these movements in ways that nonviolent protests simply don't create.
Well, unfortunately, that's just simply not. Well, yes, that might be true. And so, what that quote is always being used. Like it creates, like dissidence and so forth. But in reality, what ends up happening is that what ends up happening.
Fucking reality.
What ends up happening?
You can repeat it all the
What
time.
ends up happening? What ends up happening?
So we can move on, because I want to move on to
What ends up happening? Shut the hell up.
No.
What ends up happening?
Moron,
What ends up happening?
you're stupid,
What ends
and
up
you're muted
happening?
now, bitch.
What ends up happening is that what you'll find is that at a local level, that these things are incredibly effective at actually bringing awareness and like politically motivating people. What you will see though is that people outside of where the violence occurs, typically, yes, that it is not good optically for them. And so that does create some sort
We're
of
done with
problem,
that,
right?
man.
So we're fully aware of that. But the example that I would give you, if you want to talk about like actual like change that happened as a result of this, would be within the long hot summer of 1967, where the Detroit riot. The Detroit riots were literally the largest riots that happened during that year, right? Of all of the violence that happened, it was the largest scale, right? And in that one specifically, that motivated Romney to go to, he was a Republican at the time, to introduce legislation specifically aimed at like helping like getting rid of the housing segregation. And he specifically cited the violence as the cause for removing that. He specifically said, if we do not pass this legislation, we will never be safe in our streets. He said those words specifically. And the Republicans had previously rejected the legislation and said, we do not want to do this. We're not going to have race mixing. We're not going to have them living in our neighborhoods. But once he cited the violence and said, this is what's happening, this is how dangerous it is, and our streets will never be safe if we don't do this, that's what finally said, okay, fine, we'll go ahead and pass that. That was the like launching point for Michigan being the most progressive when it came to housing legislation of the entire union, right? Like they undid all of that. They literally hired their very first black police officer after that in like 60 years or something like that, and then went on for the remainder of the year for like 70% of their police officers to be black. They completely ended all the segregation. They introduced like 13 different laws. They became the most progressive. So to sit there, and then of course that like there was also violence all around the rest of the country, and then that also like, because that was what was one of the largest driving forces or driving aims of that violence was specifically towards getting fair housing. So that I don't know how you could possibly detach the two. It's one thing if you could say, oh, maybe it seemed like there could have been some association. It's another thing when you can say he literally cited it, literally said it out of his own freaking mouth.
Sure.
This is the reasoning for it.
We got to move on. So let's go to Doobie, Scott, J Chow, Ty.
So really quickly, so I put something in the group chat that someone in chat posted in Prime's channel, and I saw this 2 years ago, so I need to go over it again before I feel like confident arguing about it. But I remember it being very convincing, in that violence actually did reduce vote share. But again, I saw it 2 years ago. I need to go over it again. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to ask Lactoid a question. Because I did agree with Fanatic. Right? There is a distinction that I'd make between attacking individuals, private property, and the government, right? But even then, I think that there's a point at which you could cross that line, and it might even be justified, right? So yeah, people are voting for policies, but if someone's voting for a policy that is doing active harm to you and your community, your family, at some point, a vote is more than just a dot on a piece of paper. It's you're voting for a policy that does real harm in the real world. And it might be reasonable to say, hey, you voted to do this terrible thing to me, so fuck you. You don't get to do that, right? Just because there's more of you. So I think there's just that meme line that people throw around, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I think there's truth to that, right? And I think we need to acknowledge that. We can say, hey, yeah, well, who decides what's the good thing or what's the bad thing or what's worth the violence? Well, yeah, it's obviously subjective, right? But I think that just saying that this is never acceptable is just not true. I think we need to acknowledge that it is sometimes.
Oh yeah, ultimately, I guess I agree. Ultimately, it's subjective, but I just don't see it being a feasible. When you're talking about going after individual voters, it would simply be more effective just to go after the government and just curtail certain democratic rights, which we currently do, right? Despite the fact that most Americans want to illegalize burning the flag, the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. Democracy doesn't rule in this case because of the First Amendment. Now, that's one situation in which we simply say majority doesn't rule, as opposed to going after the people who believe that it should be illegal. I just don't see it as in the vast majority of cases, and
I'll give you a real world example,
and especially this case, it being either superior to any other option.
I agree with you, but I'll give you a more politically relevant example, right? An example that's relevant today. A lot of trans activists, for example, it always gets back to the transes, consider these bills that are being pushed to stop giving puberty blockers, HRT, whatever, to trans children. They consider that a form of genocide, right? Because we know what that does to the rates of suicidality, right? Yeah. First off, so they would say, hey, you are intentionally harming these children, leading to their deaths. So I saw Vosh make this argument a while back on his stream where he was talking about hey, at what point, if they're intentionally causing the deaths of these children, because we know that's what the result is, whether or not they say that's what they're doing or not, at what point does it make sense to take up arms?
Right. Well, but even in that case, the only logical, so I don't agree with that. But even if I did, the only justifiable course of action would be to take up arms against the government, not against your neighbor because they happen to be there, because they had nothing to do.
What if your neighbor is donating to the party that's doing this, knowing that the party is doing this, he's voting for them to do this policy, he has a sign in his front yard? At some point,
it's attacking this random guy is a.
I'm not talking about
it's not going to make a dent. Right, it's not going to make a dent. It's going to be ineffective. And this is what I'm saying. It seems like in every scenario, this is just simply not effective.
Just ineffective. Counter-effective.
It's counter-effective.
Yeah,
in every situation is counter-effective when there is better alternatives, and it's not even anywhere close effective enough to justify the fact that that you are doing a moral wrong. And I do think you're doing a moral wrong. Despite the fact that your target happens to be like a corporation, like a conglomerate of people, as opposed to one person. If this, let's say you have a business, like a small business that's owned by one person, that's their lifeline. Yeah, you destroy that entire person's economic well-being. Maybe it's owned by 10 people, right? You destroy that. You destroyed it a significant amount of effort and time put in by 10 people. You essentially destroyed the assets of 10 people. These things have ripple effects down, and they affect people. That's their stated
Yeah, of
intention.
course.
Their stated intention is to hurt people. And there does come a question, like, there comes a point, right, where it's like, you are hurting innocent people. You better have a rock solid justification. Like, I'm not even in favor of hurting innocent people, but if you're going to, like, you better bring me a rock solid justification. And your justification is, well, when they cut their water usage by down less than a third, and they have to restrict the hours they can do it in order to not go out of business, so 15,000 people lose their jobs, and we're still pissed about it. That's your justification for attacking innocent people? Go fuck yourself.
Well, if you're saying that by them continuing to exist,
I know Scott's supposed to go
people
next, but
continue-
like, are you
that more than that
are you
millions of people
really
are going to
insinuating?
die? And I don't know. It seems like a
Let's go
justified
to-
thing, right?
Scott's been waiting. Scott, J. Child, Ty. I think
Scott
Corey
never
Persona.
contributes.
Yeah, so I don't normally get super nerdy on these panels because these panels usually aren't the best place for it, but I think it's warranted right now while I explain as quickly as I can that it's not possible for you to actually argue without a performative contradiction and prove an impossibility proof that you're just wrong, that you can substantiate aggression towards another individual. Because by the very means of you arguing with me, you demonstrate a certain preference and private property aspect by usage of your scarce means of your time and body. And by doing that, you presume that all of human action requires this preference of your own exclusive control of your body. By doing this to justify to go against the right of the justification of exclusive control, you actually engage in a performative contradiction. So when people say, you're being a moral realist, or you're, that all morality is subjective, both of these things can be true, but according to basic logic, you cannot actually justify destruction of someone's property that is a non-aggressor. Only when someone is an aggressor upon you and upon your private property, because of the fact that argumentation without a performative contradiction puts forward the idea of first user, first owner private property rights, that it's actually impossible for you to make a logical argument that says that you can, because the ends justify the means, you can attack someone else's private property. So to make that argument is to make an illogical argument. And because it's illogical, it cannot be a valid proposition. So you are just wrong. Now, if you are like Doobie and you're saying, look, other people have committed certain forms of active aggression against me by way of their vote, by way of engaging in a system that is violent towards me and my goals, that is true. But again, you have to engage in restitution in order to correct the imbalance here. Because the moment you go beyond restitution in a non-voluntary means, you actually become the aggressor in that situation. So if someone, let's say, votes to restrict or make water more expensive, and then you go over and you burn down their house, you've become the aggressor in that situation. And this is a morally unjustifiable position. There, you guys can deal with that as you want. And I get that argumentation
I guess,
ethics is really nerdy, but
nobody's going to engage.
You're not going to find
you didn't say anything of value.
Wait, hold on. So Scott, I agree with everything you said up to the very end, right? Actually, I raised my hand earlier because I was gonna bring up the thing that you addressed like right after I raised my hand, so I appreciate that. But okay. I guess I would just agree that being the aggressor is like inherently like immoral. It's in an unjustifiable position. I think it is justified to be the aggressor sometimes, right?
How?
In cases like the one the hypothetical I laid out, right? So there's you live in a place where
in a performative contradiction by having because you're arguing with me, therefore you already presuppose the right of exclusive control over my body as a means of us having this very conversation.
Until that right of exclusive control of your body and your property does some kind of harm to me, right? What you're choosing to do with your body and with your property does some kind of harm. In the case that I laid out earlier,
become the aggressor,
which would be hoarding all the water in the area, so I have no water to drink and my family's fucking dehydrating, right? So
well, it depends on what we mean by hoarding the water. Now you're engaging in positive rights that doesn't actually fit the logic of the situation.
So I laid out a hypothetical earlier, right? So there's a company or a person or a thing that is like taking control of all the water, and they are either let's say they're just increasing it the price of this thing to a level that is totally like unreachable, right? Nobody in the area can pay for it, right? So people, as a result, people in the area are dehydrating. The harm is
that's an unjustifiable moral position to attack them if they have exclusive control over the water and they did not.
I would just
exclusive control and they're selling it.
Yeah,
It's
I would just
unjustifiable.
disagree.
You can't
I would say,
justify
hey,
it.
I would
morally.
say that, hey, you can be
It's
the
just
aggressor.
your fee-fees.
You can be
You wanna be the aggressor.
You
go
can
ahead.
be the
Revenge.
aggressor.
Sorry,
You
sir,
can be
come
the
on.
aggressor by your lack of a certain action, right? So you not opening up the doors and giving these people who are dehydrating and dying at your fucking gates, you not giving them water is an act of aggression, right?
It's
So
not an act of
so they'd be
aggression
so
to
they'd be
give up exclusive
justified
control of your
in
private
taking the role
property.
of the
No.
aggressor and taking the role of the aggressor and attacking your compound and taking the water for themselves. Absolutely.
That's not a
Let-
refutation of it.
I gotta.
You became the aggressor
I
by
gotta
attacking someone because of their
move
own
on.
exclusive control of their private property.
Yeah, and I just think it's justified to be the aggressor sometimes.
Jay Chow.
Yeah, but that's
Ty,
illogical,
And,
so you're
and
wrong.
Corey.
Yeah, so I want to respond to Lactoid's thought experiment, in which it just by itself, I completely agree. Okay, if there is an innocent person that gets affected by somebody being pissed at something else, and they're not like doing anything about that something else, but to the innocent person, then yeah, that's kind of messed up. No, it's not just kind of messed up. It is messed up. Now, the problem with applying our issue at hand, which is the golf course cement thingamabob, to that thought experiment is that it just doesn't apply, because the golf courses and I would say are hardly innocent in the issue. Not saying that like they're guilty of the drought, they're responsible for the drought, but France is in a drought, and this is my personal opinion. I think most people would agree to say that like if you're a country in a drought, you probably like using any sort of water for the golf courses is just not a priority and should not even be protected. Yes, there was a deal being made with the government, which probably would have like maybe tried to make it better, but it's just like that water could probably be used in better ways than watering golf courses. And then the other thing which I find baffling, which is what made me go into Upward earlier, I apologize, is when Lactoid, you started to equate people filling up golf holes with cement as like violence and damage and hurt against people. Which, like, one, there is no physical violence being done against people, and even if you're talking about the monetary damages, it probably doesn't exceed the thousands. As what Fabian just said before, like, yeah, sure, even if the cement starts to poison the surrounding grass, it's not going to put them out of business. It's they could always replace the holes. Yeah, sure, if the people are ever caught, the vandalizers, they're probably going to go to prison, and maybe they'll have to pay restitution. Who knows? And maybe that balances things all out. They're not doing this with the express intent of hurting people.
Yes, they are.
No, they're not. They're trying
Private
to get
property damage is
They're trying
enslavement
to.
of people.
It's not intent.
Yes,
It's not
it
an
is.
intent. It's a consequence. It's a consequence, not an intent. Their intent is probably to get the issue out to the public in order to spread awareness, in which, as we've said before, it has done so. And so then for you guys to completely say that this is just completely violent and they're just like vandalizers, just criminals equivalent to
They are
like the most,
it's
most
very
terrible
simple.
criminals, okay? Then,
actually really
no,
simple.
you're just wrong.
I'd like to respond to
You're
this.
just
No,
wrong.
it's actually
Yeah,
really simple,
so-
right? When you damage someone's property, right, that property is mixed with their labor, either the money that it required in order for them to gain that, or the labor that they put in themselves. You cannot separate
you,
the
Locke.
labor from the private property, and because that labor is directly connected to it, by damaging their property without restitution, without being able to give them
These owners
anything
are
in
probably
return, then
millionaires. They'll be fine
it doesn't
with
matter.
a couple of cement in the
no,
golf
it's
holes.
okay. So it's okay if I only kick your ass a little bit, not all the way a bit, because you'll be fine.
You guys are making
If I
it
go over
sound
there
like
and
they're gonna
beat
go
your
out of
fucking ass,
business
it'll
and
be
die.
okay.
That's
Because
my
I didn't kill
problem.
you,
Okay,
like
hold
you'll
on.
heal.
You're
Right?
taking
What
I
you've
want-
done
saying to
is
the
your
extreme.
labor. No, I'm not. I'm simply explaining what property is made up of. Property is made up of labor, and
Yeah.
when people
made
put
up
their
of
labor
atoms?
in order to gain,
FYI.
okay, I get it. You're a materialist, but like what I'm saying is that people's labor are mixed with it, and so when you attempt to justify the idea of using violence against people, or as we will say, damage of their property. What you are doing is you are enslaving them by damaging the labor that it put in order to do this. And if you allow this to continue in a Piagetian perspective, you have made them both a past and future slave to your actions. You have enslaved those individuals by not giving them restitution.
Hey, child, please don't interrupt.
You have done.
Fabian, you just committed a dialogue contradiction, whatever it is that you're using. Okay, I worked really hard to get these brain cells by going through political theory class, and you mentioning
you need a refund.
The aspects of like John Locke is damaging what I've worked so hard. Please just shut up.
It just feels like you're not grasping what
just say why I'm wrong.
Scott's actually correct.
This was to
so 3 points.
Cement in golf holes, guys. Come on.
Okay, so
dismiss and pivot.
All right.
I'll take that W.
Toyd.
Okay, so 3 points now. I have a political science degree. In political theory, you learn about John Locke. He's, at least in my college, he was on the required reading. He might be on yours too. Maybe you haven't gotten to that part yet. The second thing here.
Wait, hold on, Lactoid. You didn't listen to what I said. I said that I learned about John Locke.
Okay, so what about his argument about the because like wouldn't it make sense that like if I work 20 years on a car and then you destroy that car, didn't you just take away 20 years of my life from me without my consent?
And if you don't give him restitution, he now needs to work another 20 years to fix that fucking car.
Yeah, so didn't you just like remove 20 years of my labor 20 years of my life that I'll never get back? You just removed that from me without my consent. True?
True.
Okay, so don't we agree that removing like having people work for years and then taking that away from them, like without that's slavery, right? By definition, that's slavery.
That's
slavery.
So stupid.
What?
Don't engage with that.
What do you define as slavery?
So brain dead. Don't do it.
Show me where in John Locke he said that it was slavery.
Okay, well, what do you define as slavery? I define slavery as like.
Show me where in your political theory class that equates to slavery.
Okay, first of all, it was like 7 years ago.
You have an argument?
I don't. It was 7 years ago. Hold on.
Can
I finish, or are you just going to talk over me?
No, he never did that. You can't.
Yeah, I know.
Okay?
So
you're making a leap.
Wait. I don't know.
Of a well-known philosopher in which a lot of people respect, and then twisting its words into equating.
No, that's not what I'm doing.
Don't ever bring up that. Oh, I also have a political science.
That's not what I'm.
Order. Lactoid. I do want to give it.
JHL still doesn't have an argument.
Okay. So first of all, I have. It's been a little bit since I've read the second treatise. I don't know if he specifically used the word slavery. Regardless, it is a obvious implication of his argument when he's saying that, like, because like, what's the difference? If I put a gun to somebody's head and make them work for 20 years and then take the car at the end, we would all agree that is slavery, right? But if someone's worked at a car for 20
labor, Jesus, can you not stop?
You're saying, whoa, if I come up to, okay, we'll make it crystal clear. If I come up to somebody with like a gun and I say, go pick that field of cotton, and then like I'm holding the gun against your head and you're picking all the cotton for me, and then I take all the cotton and sell it, we would agree this is slavery, right?
It's forcing. Well, yes, it would be slavery because it's forcing someone to work against their will.
Right. And so if somebody else goes out and picks like for 10 years, they pick a whole bunch of cotton, and then I come up with them with a gun and take all the cotton away, functionally this is the same. Because they just spent 10 years picking cotton and they don't even get to keep
it. The difference, Lactoid, is the difference, Lactoid, is because in the other the difference, Lactoid. I was talking first, so I'm going to finish my sentence. The difference, Lactoid, is that obviously in one case you have a case where a person is literally forced to work against their will. That's the difference. Whereas in the other one, the person is making a choice. I'm going to finish talking as I started talking first. So anyway, so Lactoid, the difference between these two is that in one, the difference in this case is that in one of them, you forced a person to work against their will. The other one is you exploited their labor. These two, yes, there is an overlap in that. Even in slavery, you're exploiting labor, but the very key component with the slavery is the forced labor against their will. Whereas with the other one, the person can choose to just chalk that up as a loss, or the person can choose to work again and try to gain whatever it is. That's why this is not slavery. Do you understand the difference?
So my argument here is that it's functionally the same because at the end of the day,
you already said that.
You would have never worked for the 10 years if you had known someone with a gun would come up to you and take.
So it sounds like exploitation.
10 years of your labor, right? At the end of the day,
so that's what, remember we said there was two
there's
functions.
no functional difference.
There's two.
You're simply giving it a different name.
I got you.
No functional difference.
Here, I got you. There's two functional components. One of them is exploitation of labor. The other one is forced labor. Those are two components. That's what exploitation of labor is one. Exploitation.
Holy shit, you're dumb. You're a fucking liar.
Exploitation of one. Exploitation of labor is one function. Forced labor is the second one. So yes, when you say, hey, you're exploiting their labor, you're exploiting their labor, yes, those two things are the same. I will give you that. But the difference is when we talk about slavery, we're not talking about just exploitation of labor. We're talking about the forced labor. So you're only talking about one function. That's the problem. That's why these things are not the same. That's a different in function. Right?
Okay.
So I reject your differentiation.
We're going to have
it's functional.
Okay. You win. You win.
Make the counter work real quick.
All right.
So,
like, hey, it's got to be quick. I got to move on. We got two other people who've been waiting, very patiently, and I've let this go on for a long time. So let's get it done, please. And then I'm going to Ty, and then Corey.
I don't see a functional moral difference between putting the gun in you now and putting the gun in you 10 years down the road. If the effect is you're losing 10 years of the work you did without your consent, and that's being taken from you.
I don't see a functional difference in exploitation of labor. I agree with you.
So second of all,
Fanatics,
Jay Chow.
Exploitation of labor.
It's not the definition of exploitation.
Shut up,
but the Jay Chow. The third point is like, okay, you're saying that, obviously in these people's opinions, they don't think the golf course should get any water, and you're saying that. Okay, even if we step back from like the moral lens and we just look at this from like a utilitarian lens, the government had a hearing on this. Like the people like made their case about like reducing water usage. The golf courses came and explained the economics of like, yeah, if this happens, like we're going to lose a bunch of money, but also 15,000 jobs might be at risk. That's 15,000 livelihoods that very well might be at risk, right? And the government said like, okay, well, we can't obviously shut down all industry and all like our entire economy. We have to do this in a smart way. And this is the decision they made. Obviously, they had access to more information because they had hearings on this. They had access to more information than you or me. And they decided this. And now the people who, I mean, maybe they went to the hearings. I doubt most of them did. But now the people who don't even know shit are going there and destroying the property and causing even more damage. It's just ridiculous.
Hold on, can you let me know
we got to
move. There's no way. There's absolutely no way.
Let's go to
okay.
Also,
Ty,
just real quick, that's
Ty,
not what exploitation
Corey.
So,
Ty.
Even by Marx's definition,
right.
that's stupid.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I got kicked to the back of the line a little bit ago, so I've got notes going back for a while. I definitely wanted to get on where Scott was talking about civil disobedience versus vandalism. I think there was a relevant point there. Although Fnatic shut that down for some reason, I don't know why, but I do agree with most of the points in the exchange with Fnatic and Doobie regarding that. So I think there was a little bit of material that we could have hit there, but oh well. When it comes to the drought in France has had a hell of a summer this year, Western Europe entirely, in the regards that it's been one of the hottest years on record. It's been one of these deals to where, everyone's running out of water. The Rhine has been drying up for the last couple of years, which is insane. So here's the issue when it comes to France. Lactoid was really on point when it comes to that France is kicking ass when it comes to climate change. They have the lowest GDP per capita emissions of any developed country. They're actually rivaling lower in developed countries. So yay for France. However, when it comes to the Paris Climate Accord, there was absolutely no way that any country was actually going to be able to succeed on that deal. It's a 50% reduction within 15 years, which would have been to 2030. No. And if you have any questions of that, there's a video that I just put up on my YouTube called Green Energy, The Impossible Future. You can check that out. As far as the property damage of slavery conversation, because, that was insane. As a fellow political science person, the important part of slavery is that it's the legal ownership of a person. This doesn't actually qualify under that regard. However, do I think that's exploitation, theft, and a life-threatening violation that Scott or Lactoid are actually going after? Yeah, it's an incredibly severe thing. I'm not going to walk away from that, and I'm glad you guys bring that up. But by definitional standing, no, this is not slavery. So thank you.
Can I disagree with that?
First of all, it's not exploitation.
We got it. We don't have any time. I gotta get Corey. Shut up. Corey.
Dude, you let Fanatics scream at everyone on this panel all the time, and then you just sit there.
Holy shit. Thank you.
I'll be short,
more than you do.
I'll be short.
Okay, great. Corey. Thanks.
Well, yeah, my point is long gone, but just I guess to continue on what Lactoid was touched upon, just a few clarifying questions, because it seems like you are concerned with basically innocent parties being damaged, or suffering harm, and that
being
unless
attacked, being aggressed upon without their consent. Yeah.
sure, but so and I think I get to your point, but I think it matters on like how far you zoom in or you zoom out in terms of like a climate crisis, okay, and that a business is potentially contributing to, let's say, a drought, and there's like collective consequences, as in as you alluded to, sort of like on economic terms, like potentially 15,000 jobs are lost if these golf courses or golf course goes out of business. I'm just curious, like if it was proven, or if there's like strong evidence showing that as a result of this drought, there's 15,001 deaths. Is then the protest sort of justifiable?
I don't think the protest would be justifiable in terms of, again, attacking innocent people. I think that the government, like, I'm assuming this information is available beforehand, so like they would be able to bring this to the government and be like, "Hey, 15,000 people are going to die if we let like the golf courses still have a little bit of water."
Or yeah, or like even maybe just to simplify it, if like there's a body count associated with the drought, like are you like okay with that? Like like at what point like does there have to be any sort of body count for any sort of like protest like that, innocuous protest, to take place?
I guess I would have to like see what the body count is and like look at the particular circumstances. I mean, obviously there's some level that would be like acceptable. In the same way we accept casualties for like the economic benefit of driving, right? We accept some casual, like there are people who like pass away due to certain circumstances, but that doesn't mean we shut down society.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
But if the human cost gets like to a point where it's just like, yeah, like this is clearly like a situation we have to address. I mean, that could be a situation the government should look into. It doesn't look like this is actually killing anybody. It looks like people are upset that they can't wash their cars, which again, that's a waste of water, to be honest. That's even more of a waste of water than a golf course.
Sure. I'm just trying to like pretty much like tear apart the point. It's like you are not like against protest in principle, as in like there's a threshold in which like you're willing to give some leeway for potential some innocent parties being harmed.
No, I'm against attacking innocent people. If you're concerned about people like dying, you should be protesting the government. You should be nonviolent protests seem to be more effective, so that's what you should be doing. Even if that's incorrect, then at most you could have an argument for violent protests against the government. This idea of attacking innocent people just doesn't work.